Today we're joined by Guy Morris, author, futurist, and lifelong technologist whose journey spans global energy, macroeconomics, which was a really boring class for me actually, advanced computing, artificial intelligence, nonprofit leadership, consulting, songwriting, and now speculative fiction that explores where humanity may be headed next. Guy is the author of several thought-provoking novels that blends cutting-edge technology and deep philosophical and spiritual questions. His work doesn't just ask what the future will look like, it asks what it will cost us. Guy brings a rare mix of real-world experience, technical insight, and moral curiosity, and we're excited to have this conversation with him today. Guy, welcome to the show.
Paul, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored.
Great to have you, Guy. Great to have you.
So, Guy, I wanted to, give the elevator pitch, because if we went into all of the things that you've done in your life, I think we would spend probably the next hour and a half to 3 hours of discussing that. So before we get into it, I just wanted to see if you could give a little bit of your very extensive background of multiple careers for the audience.
Well, it's ironically, my journey started as a 13-year-old homeless runaway in the streets of LA. I was working alongside migrant workers to survive. Went back home long enough when I felt safe to get a GED. And by 15, I was hitchhiking across the desert to join a Christian commune in Tucson, Arizona. And I was at the commune for about 3 months because I had so many social issues. But ultimately wound up getting married at age 19, way too young. I wasn't ready. And got an opportunity. I think it was a blessing. It was actually a miracle from the Lord to go back to college. And at the time, I was still functionally illiterate, but I knew that I saw it as a gift from God to change my stars. And so I worked part-time, usually at a 7-Eleven in the midnight shift. I would get home when I wasn't working. I'd be studying all night, or I'd be at the studio or the university studying. And so I slept about 4 hours a night for about 5 years, raising a child because my wife was anorexic. And I ended up with 3 degrees, a scholarship to Arizona full graduate school scholarship, acceptance into Harvard MBA program,
Wow.
An intern job at IBM, and a letter from Paul Volcker, the Fed chairman at the time. And it was because I had, in my determination and my desperate desire to get a grad school scholarship because I didn't have any more money, I made a bet with the school dean that if I could build a macroeconomic model that could beat everybody in the school, I wanted to be on the list for scholarships.
Wow.
I beat everybody in the nation, including the Federal Reserve. And
Wow.
it was because I had developed, based on a radical theory, I had developed the first set of algorithms that could not only prove, but predict the productivity value of technology sales on the future economy. So basically, for every dollar of technology being invested, what was the productivity we should expect? And that was revolutionary at the time. And you remember Paul Volcker and Sherman's for another decade talking about the productivity revolution. And that was based on my algorithms. Now they improved them. It became a whole field within the macroeconomic field, the algorithms for producing productivity. But I was the first one who pioneered that. So that started my career. I got my first job was at IBM. I went to Oxy Petroleum, where I reported to CXOs, and I re-engineered their global audit group and worked on, implemented their environmental compliance office, pushing hundreds of millions of dollars of capital investment up to the board of directors for approval to comply with EPA. There were some experiences at the oil company that really opened my eyes as to how the world really worked, having to do with greed and deception.
Sure.
And misleading shareholders and government alike. And I think those were some of the things that started to crystallize in me my view of what the real world was. But I left there and decided that I didn't want to be part of an industry that was going to pollute the planet for my grandchildren. So I got involved in early internet startup company that then got sold off. And then I went to Oracle after that and implemented multi-million dollar systems and left Oracle and got a job at Microsoft. And while they hired me as a normal consultant, I was determined that Microsoft needed to evolve. When I first arrived at Microsoft in their services group, they refused to take any contracts over $40,000 because they never wanted to own the project. They wanted their partners to own the project. That was leading to a whole rash of customer service issues. And so I spent the first 7 years at Microsoft implementing their program management office so that we not only had the skills to go after and do big deals and do them profitably. So we went from 0 multi-million dollar deals to a $750 million portfolio in 7 years.
Wow.
Then I went and then started a group called Pursuit Services where I could go after and teach them and help them to win those big deals more often. And my metric was anything that my team directly took responsibility for, we had to win 65% of the time. And we beat that metric 4 years. Then Microsoft brought in my 7th VP in 6 years, or 6th VP in 7 years. And he was a new guy from the outside. He didn't know anybody from Adam at Microsoft. When the crash happened in 2009, he decided he didn't need a big deal team, and so he laid off all of us. So that kind of started me rethinking what I was going to do with my life. At that point, I was in my mid late 50s. I wasn't, and the market was kind of crashed. I just trying to decide whether I wanted to go to a smaller company and start over again.
Sure.
And ultimately decided to start a business that failed. One of my first and only failures in life, but it was a brilliant idea. It was a way of capturing people on their home cameras, putting them automatically within a movie scene set, allowing them to, measure them, get themselves, kind of dialed in so they're doing right, cut little, 10, 15-second clips and be able to, through the server in the cloud, put those clips together to put together little vignettes of them and their friends or them with the celebrity. So you could in a $5 footlong commercial, or you could be in the scene in Seinfeld with the soup Nazi where you're the cabbage man. Create little opportunities for people using webcams and cameras and lights that we all have from home now.
Right.
Using those to actually integrate those into published rights protected content. It was too early in the game. The investment community was wrong. It was the wrong timing. I lost a bunch of money. I tucked my tail between my legs, went back and did some consulting for Microsoft for several years before I decided that it was time to, I had enough on a lot of levels, and I decided to retire. Now, since 2020, I've produced 6 books. 4 of them are published so far. All of them that are published have won awards. I've got 2 nonfictions that'll come out next year. One of them we'll talk about today on prophecy analytics. The other one called The AI Tsunami, a Survival Guide for Humanity. And I'm already starting to outline the next 2 novels after that. So in between then, I have managed nonprofit, cancer nonprofits for children. I started an author event network, which helps other authors in the Seattle area do book signings, and I do about 65 days of book signings a year. So I stay pretty doggone busy because I have a very, very dysfunctional relationship with leisure.
With who?
Leisure.
Leisure. Okay. Now, are you married right now, Guy?
I am, and I have an angel of a wife. My first marriage was a total disaster. I spent 10 years convincing myself I should never, ever, ever, ever try that again. But God sent me my first wife, and within 3 months of dating her, she told me that she was going to marry me. I better know what to say. I said, the kind of woman I like.
You are truly what I would call a renaissance.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I haven't even touched on, during my career, I also wrote songs for Disney. I earned a Coast Guard charter captain license. I used to go diving for sharks feeding sharks without cages. I got obsessed about an historical mystery and spent 12 years on and off exploring Mesoamerica trying to solve it, which got me involved with a death grip with one of the cartel thugs. And I raised my son aboard a 50-foot sailing yacht. So I had a recording studio for a while. So I have, when you say Renaissance, that was actually an intentional lifestyle that I chose in college.
Right.
Going from a functional illiterate poor guy that had no hope, no chance, no knowledge of the world, felt totally taken for granted by everybody because I was too much of a dummy to know better. When my mind started kicking in and I started absorbing, just like a sponge absorbing all of the knowledge around me, picking one field was just tantalizingly boring.
Right.
And so there was a part of me that wanted to know, while my focus for my career was in business and economics and finance and leadership, I constantly explored the sciences and the arts and the film industry. I was on the board of a small indie film company for a while, and there was a constant effort in me to optimize my time on Earth and make it mean something.
Amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Well, now, so you see how many different directions we go with it. But I think what we want to do is focus on the I guess is your next book coming out, or the book you just came out with, Prophecy Analytics.
Analytics. It's through editing. It's actually in formatting now and cover design. So it was turned down. I just spent a couple of months in discussions with Westbo Zondervan, and they've decided to pass on it because it's too politically controversial.
Yeah, that happened.
I wasn't surprised, but I wanted to give them the chance. So it's already in process now to be published, probably in January sometime.
Oh, coming up.
Yeah, it's coming out pretty
So
soon.
you got it. It's finished. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's done.
Okay. And do you have a publisher, or are you self-publishing?
I decided to, in part because of for this one, I thought I'd give it a publisher a chance. But when I realized that it would create political heat for whatever publisher took it,
Sure.
I decided, you know what? I'm not giving it a bother. I'm just going to do it. I know how to do it. I've built major organizations. I can find editors and great designers off of Reedy. I published myself successfully. So I decided that if I wasn't going to get a Christian label to take it for political reasons, I would just do it myself.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
And to a great extent, from all my books, this is the one where I don't intentionally, strategically don't expect to make any money at. I'm going to be giving copies away. More than happy to send you one when it's out, but I'll be sending out copies and giving it away. When I do my book signings, it'll be The Lost Leader, that if you buy the other series, you get that one free. It's really there to provide that extra depth of knowledge that the things that I'm talking about in the narrative series have a factual, meaningful, analytical depth to them. That I'm not just claiming something in the book to be flashy in the book, but there's a real analysis that people should consider in their thought, in their own personal thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
So Guy, I want to ask. So the book that we're talking about is called Prophecy Analytics.
And the second tagline name is How to Discern Prophecy in Plain Sight.
There you go.
Mathematical validation.
Exactly. So before we started recording, you were going into this a little bit. I was hoping you could elaborate again with it, because from what we just learned about a lot of your background. So you said, your one and only failure was the startup company. I don't know what year what year was that when you were trying to do that?
It was around 2010 when the market was crashing.
Okay, so but 2010, if you think of that idea and what you explained in there, I mean, that's like, I don't know if it's exactly the same type of technology, but that technology is definitely here and it's happening all the time. And especially with how AI is developing rapidly, with, taking sound bites or
It was on the leading edge. It was on the bleeding edge in 2010, but I
Yeah.
knew that I could get the technology, it would evolve and would mature, and I could have a viable market within a few years.
right.
At some point in the conversation, we'll go back to why I decided to write about AI, but I'll give you the brief version. It was because I discovered that a program had escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia. Wasn't lost, stolen, or broken. The program escaped the lab on its own. The NSA couldn't find it.
It jumped the fence. You're saying AI jumped the fence.
It jumped the fence. And I know that's true because when I determined exactly how that could happen and why they would design it that way, they were kind enough to send 2 FBI agents to my door.
Yeah.
They were very upset. I was so obnoxiously giddy that I was right, that I blew them off their game. They gave me the "we are not amused" speech. I gave them the "what are you going to do about it" shrug. And
Right.
then my wife came home and gave me the "why are there 2 FBI agents" in my dining room speech.
Right.
Best night ever.
That's amazing, though. So this happened around
That actually happened. That was the
10 or 11.
inspiration for the AI that's featured in the series.
Yeah.
Now, but the prophecy analytics started, it started in my very early stages of coming to the Lord in the 70s. Now, as you guys probably remember, certainly Paul Sr., Left Behind was a big thing back then. People were all talking about it. And I didn't know diddly squat about the Bible, really. But I grew up with con men and liars and hucksters. And so
Sure.
I learned to be very acute to, nah, that don't fit. Right.
Yeah.
And so as I would read the books and then listen to other teachers and they would talk about this and that and different things, some of it I was like, okay, maybe, I'm going to go look that up myself. I think I want to go look that up myself. Once I started realizing how to read and learn, I wanted to look it up myself. And I saw that, no, that doesn't fit. What they're saying and what the text is saying, that's not fitting for me. That sounds like they're biased somehow, or they're adding something else in there. And I started saying, no, and for a time I started saying, okay, all of this prophecy stuff is just metaphorical. It's good versus evil. Good will win in the end. It's all baloney, and all this stuff that we're in the end times, I bet I can debunk it. And so I wanted to figure out a framework to debunk it. But I wasn't sure how. And I was still, all of this other eschatology, all this other traditional thinking was in my head. Now I was trying to figure out a way to have a cleaner approach to understanding what I was reading.
Was you trying to debunk prophecy itself or debunk how they were presenting prophecy?
I wasn't sure.
Okay.
I wasn't sure. And I was open that prophecy could be true, but the way they were interpreted just didn't feel right. But if it was the way they were interpreted, no, that's not fitting for me. It all sounds so hyper supernatural, but when I see how prophecy was fulfilled in the past, it was never that way. In fact, one of the biggest blunders of the Pharisees came in how they were supposed to be the most smartest people on the planet with the prophecies of the first Messiah, and they missed it entirely. And I started realizing that there were a few key reasons why they missed it entirely. And so the first major step, the first major kernel for the framework that I call prophecy analytics came from as you would expect, from a National Geographic article. I was reading an article, and this was probably, and again, I was involved in environmental work at the oil company, so I was always attuned to these things. It had to do with the loss of fish stocks all around the world. Every major region, from China to the U.S. to Europe, Mediterranean, every place, the fish stocks were down by 30% or more. And there's all the predictable reasons. It was pollution, ocean warming, overfishing, blah, blah, blah. But it dawned on me that there was a prophecy about a third of the fish of the sea dying. And I think it was the seals.
Yeah,
No, it was in
the 8th chapter of Revelation.
Fourth trumpet.
Yep.
And then I went back and I said, well, wait a minute. I went back and read the fourth trumpet, and there's said the flaming mountain would fall into the sea, and a third of the fish would die, and the ocean would be essentially toxic.
And a third of the boats would be destroyed.
And a third of the boats would be gone.
That's a big deal.
And that was a real sticking point for me, because every single teacher I'd ever heard said, that's all part of the last 7 years. That's all part of the tribulation. That's all part of what's going to happen at the very end. And it's because of how evil we were, and it's going to happen after the rapture. So we don't have to worry about it. And I kept thinking, well, wait a minute. Here's valid scientific evidence that it's already occurred in my lifetime. And so I started thinking about a number of things radically differently. So I started thinking about, what does it mean to say all of these things are fulfilled in the last generation? How do I define which generation is that? How do I define the last generation? And that had to start with the end of the age of the Gentiles that supposedly had a purpose to it. And so I started using this framework, and I looked at other prophecies, and I started going through, and I realized the first thing I realized, I actually started by taking 25 prophecies. I went to the library. I got data to support whether they had been completed or not completed. I developed what I call the attributes or the outcomes. So flaming rock falls on the sky. I say, great, but can I confirm that the ocean was polluted, a third of the fish of the sea died, and a third of the boats were destroyed during this time frame? Then I started thinking about, well, what time frame was that? So I started breaking the problem down into all these analytical questions that I needed to resolve. And I actually created a program for it. I had a computer analytical model at the office, because we did geology, and I had millions of years of geologic data already in the database. And so I spent a few weekends gathering data and a long 4-day weekend building this model. And it basically debunked 5 of the prophecies I thought might be complete. It said, no, that their correlation isn't high enough to include these. But for the 20 that were concluded, it was because it had things like a third of the fish of the sea dying, which didn't occur in the geologic record for 25 million years. So we had at least one of those things was a once in 25 million years probability.
Wow.
The initial model came up with a 1.4 trillion to 1 probability that we were living in the end times.
So let's go with that fish.
That got my attention.
The fish dying. Because I covered for a while, and I've been doing YouTube videos for 15 years, and 41 years in ministry. A ton of it in prophecy, from the Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth, Dr. Jack Van
Hempy,
and then of course following some of the other guys, and then studying all of myself, as you do. That is in about 2011, 12, a ton of fish kills were happening all over the world. And I was covering them. Matter of fact, Paul, there's a prophecy in the book of Hosea that says, because of man's sin and his abominations and adultery and his lying and all this, that the fish are going to die. The birds are going to die. The beasts are going to die. But what I never didn't do, and I covered all these fish kills happening everywhere.
You even wrote a book too.
I wrote a book called Hosea Prophecy, because it's in the Hosea Prophecy, but it matches the Revelation prophecy. And I even got a phone call from CNN, and they're like, okay, whoa, we didn't realize. And they interviewed me on their radio, CNN radio. And I even did a television interview, but they didn't air it. And after that, what happened was they shut down. They stopped talking about it. They didn't want to talk about it. So what I didn't do was figure out, well, how many fish died worldwide. I never went there, which is what you did. You went there.
Mm-hmm. I'm an analytical guy. I build macroeconomic models. To me, it's all about datas and algorithms, right? The data there, can I get an algorithm to explain it? Is it consistent? Then one of the principles was that it all happens in a single generation. So the data has to, some of the seals and trumpets occurred in history, but most of the events are happening in a single generation. So I had to define that generation. And it turns out that the end of the age of the Gentiles, at the end of the time when Gentiles would rule over Israel and Jerusalem, marked that marker, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so I started looking at statistically how many of these prophecies I could define the outcomes for, and then get high levels. And by high levels, I'm talking point 0.8 to perfect 1.0 correlations, and then start calculating the probabilities of those events. So I realized a number of principles. Prophecy is not about predicting the future. One of the reasons why so many people have gotten it wrong over the years is because they're using it to try and predict what will happen in the future rather than using it as a filter to understand what's already happened up till now.
Okay.
And that I could validate what could happen up till now without having to get into the biases of how I'm going to predict the future. And that got into why the future was bad. But I started realizing that many teachers, I've seen Islamic biases, pro-Israel biases, cultural biases, racial biases, nationalistic biases. And in order for me to really understand how to interpret the world through prophecy rather than through my biases
Sure.
first, I had to spend some time looking at my own biases. I had to realize where I had grown up with maybe I had been trained to have political biases. Maybe I grew up with other cultural biases. And so I realized that when I listened to other teachers, one of the strongest ones I heard was an anti-Islamic bias, because when I look at the text, it never really defines Islam. And so I realized that that's not the ultimate battle, wasn't between Christianity and Islam. And so I started kind of looking at the biases, and I started realizing that in most of the cases, the allegory that most prophecies have two components: an allegorical or metaphorical component, and then an outcome or attribute component. And if I, for the large part, ignored the allegory and only looked at the attributes, I was developing very consistent correlation maps across numbers and numbers of events. And I could go through, and the book goes through well over 100 different prophecies, debunks some of them many of them based on the attributes, but also identifies many others. So once I finished doing all this analysis, other principles like prophecy is non-linear. It doesn't happen in a specific sequence. It's written in ways that can happen in we know the general time of the times, but we have to be
not chronological.
flexible in the the sequence that
Yeah,
we've all been
sure.
taught to believe in. And I realized that the sequence of the prophecy being fulfilled was out of sequence to what I've been taught. And so I came up with all these principles, and I started applying these principles to different prophecies. And so the book then goes through defining, the end of the Gentiles, the last generation, what that means. It looks at the seven churches, which is the first call to basically saying, if we're in the end times, the first call is to repent. The first call is to do a spiritual search. And the seven churches is that spiritual search. And so I'm pretty blunt in some of the correlations, but one of the most fascinating ones to come up with was the church at Pergamum, which is the only church. Now, of the seven churches, only two are not given a specific rebuke and only told to persevere and hold fast. I define those two. Both of them, those two, have to deal with the synagogue of Satan. I was able to define that based on attributes, and it's amazing. I stumbled onto the research in one of my books, and it fit. Now there's four of the other churches, or three of the other churches are given general rebukes to repent and wake up. One of the churches is told that they're in danger of being spewed out of his mouth. And the final church, the Church of Pergamum, God even says he's going to come and fight against them. And their rebuke was so bad. And that was the church that embraced the teachings of Nicolaitans and Balaam. And nobody was able to really define those for me in a way that was satisfied until I went back and looked up the meaning of the Greek root words. And Nicolaitan is basically a teaching that says it's essentially excess authoritarianism. It's legalism. It's the trying to get others to live by what you believe the standards are that you don't live by yourself. It's what we're seeing in spades in America today. And so I started with the seven churches. I decoded the seven seals. on the seven trumpets, and found most of them have already occurred, except we're up to like the sixth seal and the fifth trumpet. And then I looked at I debunked some prophecies like the rapture and third temple and a couple of other things. And one of the other keys came in understanding the beast, because in order to understand most of Revelation, we have to understand this weird beast with seven heads and 10 crowns and 10 horns. And that was where, my gosh, we've had thousands of years of historical biases, from Rome to, the Catholic Church, to, I've heard some Islamic interpretations, and it's so easy for people to say that's the Antichrist and that's the Antichrist, or that's the Antichrist, and it's any Antichrists.
Right.
But the one that we're supposed to be looking for comes from a specific beast structure that
Sure.
most people really couldn't define very well.
Hmm.
Well, in my analysis, the beast of seven heads is led by the G7 economies. The EU market, which is part of that broader capitalistic geopolitical system, has 10 monarchies, constitutional monarchy still operating in Europe.
Okay,
And 10 major financial centers from which 60 to 65% of the global economy filters through. That's the horns of power. And the horns of power relate to how I define the dragon and the systems there. And so in order for you to start even getting to the man of lawlessness, you have to be able to first define, are we in the end times? Does he have to be displayed by something at the temple? If the third temple is not really a full prophecy, although it might happen, and I explain all of that, why. And he has to be a member, one of the seven heads of this seven beast. And until you can define the beast system, you can't define the heads that are going to come out of it.
Right.
So it wasn't until 1975 when the beast formed, because that was the year the G7 formed. And it was also the year when we went from 9 monarchies in Europe back to 10. And so I didn't even understand the beast until some of these things happened. And so part of what I try to articulate in the book is that we can't use prophecy for context, because for predicting the future, because we won't know the context in order to how to interpret these things until they occur. Only once they occur do we really understand how those attributes, those outcomes fit the scenario. And sometimes the possibility of how they would exist didn't exist until even the most recent time frame.
That's so true.
So once we understand the beast, the image of the beast becomes apparent. And that wasn't apparent until the internet.
That's true.
Internet became
AI, all that.
AI became the voice for the image, the blasphemous voice. But the image actually itself it's a reflection. And what's it reflecting of? It's reflecting of our entire culture. Businesses, churches, faith, ideas, knowledge, universities, research, commerce, business, transactions, communication, banking. Every element of our modern beast system is now reflected in this beast system that now has a power and a mind of its own.
There it is. That's the image of the beast. That's why it can speak and make decisions. It can make decisions.
Bingo.
And that's the image of the beast. Yep.
So when we start to apply this analysis of attribute by attribute, prophecy by prophecy, correlation by correlation, probability by probability, we build up. And when I look at the man of lawlessness, there are 20 unique outcomes or attributes of this particular individual. When you break it down to all 20. Now, one of the arguments I say in the book is that we can't say it's the end times just because a prophecy here or a prophecy there, or even a handful of them are done. We can only make that claim, and we should only make that claim if a bulk of hundreds of them, or all of them, because there's like 140 ones that I've been able to find. Until almost all of them are complete, we can't really claim probability wise with a probability assurance that we're in those times. And the same thing for the Antichrist. We can't claim anybody is that final character of division unless he matches close to all 20, except for the one or two that haven't occurred yet. One of them being the mark of the beast, which is actually in progress and in planning today. And there was one other, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes, splitting, basically going after 3 different other countries. So there's 2 that are still in progress. But the probability, even if I assign a conservative, what I call flip of the coin, a binary probability, 0.5. If you take 0.5 to the 20th power, that's 104 million to 1. So the chances of any one man fitting all of those in the modern days, at least 100 million to 1. And that's really only dealing with leadership, right? Not just the common man.
Right.
There's one man, and for years, I couldn't match more than 4 attributes to any one man.
Okay.
Until 2024.
Okay. Then you could match a lot more.
I can match all 18 of the 20 except for the 2 that haven't occurred. And I can match a path for the other 2 being occurred under that same man. And that man is now our president. And that bothers a lot of people. Now, I'm politically agnostic. I came out of college as a GOP. Over the years, I'm very sensitive to lying and corruption. So over the years, I became agnostic and realized I wasn't going to back any political party, that a political party was an idol, that I didn't need to have any association. But I know that there's a lot of people in this nation, a lot of Christians in this nation, who would call me a heretic for even suggesting it. That's what the math says.
Wow. What's amazing about that? So you're saying President Trump, he matches 18 out of your 20. The question is the 20 criteria things that you come up with, and how did you come up with those 20? That's key. And I guess you probably explain that in the book.
I do.
And then
when I go through all 20 of them,
yep,
we look at the text itself. We include the text. We include an analysis of the text. We include an analysis of the data or the attributes and how those attributes fit those outcomes. So we go through and we break it down by each one in a couple of different ways, and then we calculate the cumulative probability of matching all of them.
Wow,
this is incredible. It's amazing. Wait, go ahead, Paul. And before
I was just curious though, because you said has there been anybody else, and you don't have to name them or not, has there been anybody else that even comes close to that number of attributes that you have set up?
Like 10 or 12 maybe?
There's a guy called Brother Paul. He has a YouTube channel. He tends to go into too many minutiae, and he's not really tying it back to scripture. I don't think he's wrong, but I think he's going about the analysis. I wanted an analysis that wasn't emotional, that wasn't biased itself. I wanted an analysis that was factually based. And so that was how I built the framework. So when I started filling in how the framework might apply to any particular leader, once I knew it was a G7 leader, I analyzed all G7 leaders versus this framework, this filter. And he's the only one who ever got past 4. And so that caught my attention. He started exceeding that in 2016, but he hadn't really met more of them until 2020, and then until just recently he's filling in even more of them. So it's been a process of completing more and more, and I think that was part of the reason I decided to finally publish the book, was to say, you know what, the statistical relevance of this is just getting too extreme for me not to at least write this out and give it to my friends who have bits and pieces of it. So it was more of, as I said, it wasn't something I expected to. If I got any fame, it was going to be of the negative type. And
Fair.
that actually there was a lot of times writing the book, and one of my Christian beta readers, she's a fairly conservative woman. They were part of the Christian motorcycle club. Her husband was the president of it. And I wanted her to read it because I know that she's got she comes from Minneapolis, so she fairly conservative woman, knows the Lord, loves the Lord, really studies things in Hebrew. She really tries to really get to the bottom of things. And it opened her eyes in a number of ways, but she made a comment that stuck with me. She said, "Guy, this is going to make you into a target."
What's a yeah, it will, Guy. It really will. And what's gonna blow your mind, and is really gonna be interesting, is the book I'm writing is Trump versus the beast, and you're saying he is the beast.
He's a part of he's one of the heads of the beast systems.
And
I look at the system as the 7 heads, 7 crowns,
right?
Basically the capitalistic, democratic capitalist system, which is run to it's not the good thing that it's got some good elements. All economic systems have good pros and cons. I'm an economist. I can point them all out.
Right.
But no system is good if we let human corruption pollute them. And we've allowed human corruption of greed and hubris and deception and all these things to basically pollute
in our capitalistic society.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's breaking down now. And the AI movement is going to enable it to basically take us back to a techno-feudalism. And so we're seeing, as a result of that, we're seeing the autocratic government concepts coming up, and again, we're seeing the basic shift of AI basically displacing people. We don't really have. We're moving away from the social mentality of taking care of our own to everyone take care of themselves, and that's all you're going to get. And so we're moving socially, emotionally, spiritually towards these things, these moments of what prophecy talks about as well. And it just happens to be at that right timing that we have the AI technology and this individual who's willing to throw it all out the window for his own power. And so it's part of the correlation is the amazing timing of all these things happening at the same time.
I think this is going to be fascinating. When your book's coming out, when? In January?
It'll come out in I haven't got it back from the formatter. It's supposed to be due back, I think, the first week in January. I'll need to go through it for corrections and
okay. So let's say
but by the end of January for sure. Probably should be.
Which is going to be really, really interesting because I'll be loving to read it, and it'll probably there'll be some of that will be good research.
Send me a mailing address. I'll be more than happy to send you a complimentary copy.
We'll send it to you. We'll send you that right after we're done here. I'll have Paul send that to him.
Yeah,
I appreciate it, and I thank you for that.
Yeah,
really
I'd love to have your feedback.
Yeah,
and I developed this framework for myself.
I know.
I developed this to share with anybody else. I was developing because I had an innate curiosity, and I start the whole book with a single question. Prophecy has no relevance unless I can answer one question definitively. Am I living in the end times? Yes or no?
That's a great question.
No, then it's all metaphorical, good versus evil. I don't have to worry about it. It's somebody else's problem to worry about. If it's yes, that has an impact on nearly every decision I make in life. And so as an analytical, naysaying, Thomas Doubter, question everything from everybody kind of guy.
Dr. No is what we used to call it when I was working.
I had to figure it out for myself, and thinking initially that I would find all of the holes, and believe me, I found a lot of holes. But what I also discovered in the process was a framework to validate what was true and debunk what wasn't with mathematical precision. And the answers blew my mind and changed my Christianity. It changed my walk, changed my view of the world. It changed my view of politics, changed my view of my career. It revolutionized my approach to my own life and how I see pretty much everything.
Wow.
And so I felt that once I realized I was at the correlation where I had 18 of the 20 attributes defined statistically in the 900 million range to 1, I realized I needed to write the book and share it with others. and I would either get blasted because I don't agree with the traditional thinkers, or I I'd have friends, some of my friends that read the book and realize that maybe there was a truth to the fact that how we've been taught prophecy may not have be the whole truth, that it's a lot closer than we think.
Wow. I've been thinking of a couple questions for you, Guy, that I think
Yeah.
are important to bring up. But first of all, I can totally understand now after going through that, um, why you're not really even going to reach out for a publisher. I totally get it. It makes a lot of sense. And then I can
They're
also
not gonna want to touch me with a 10-foot pole.
no, they're not going to.
I,
And
I'm,
That's a lawsuit happy White House.
well, there's two things. One,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure there isn't a publisher that would want to run with that.
there could be, yeah. But
There's some folks that really don't like him.
yeah,
And
well, that's true.
two, I did find a publisher for mine and Trump versus the Beast, and it's Newsmax, which is a very conservative Newsmax. I mean, you know, they're one of the 4 cable networks, number 4, I think now, behind CNN.
Right.
Newsmax is going to publish it, and it's Trump versus the Beast. In other words, he's being used to help counter the Beast. And yours, he
Very different.
these are 2 separate things. But how did we get there? How did we
No.
get there? Is a great. That's what I'm interested in reading, and so I can't wait to read your book, because how these things got you to that point,
Right.
and all of my research, why I'm at the point I'm at. This
Yeah.
is very, very interesting and will be very significant. And as you can see, I still think as we're in this process, we don't know who that one man is yet, although I have a top 10 list, you know. And how did I come up with that top 10 list? Okay, just like, how did you come up with your list? And
Yeah.
that is going to be the interesting part, I think,
Mhm.
when I read the book, is I'm going to say, oh, because I never thought of that. Or, yeah, that makes sense. Or, no, that don't work. It's going to be, it's a fair analogy. Would
You
you?
know, and I'd have to be fair. I do the same thing with others. I go through from a very picky analytical basis. I agree with this. I don't agree with that. I can see where they're correlating here, but I can't correlate there. And I think that with that sense of wanting to know for myself and
That's
not wanting
good.
to just trust what somebody else was telling
Yeah.
me was what sent me down this path. And as I said, it's not a left versus right question for me.
Right. Right.
Because once I realized that the beast itself, that America was a part of it, I had to say, well, look, one of the biases I got to get rid of is my false sense of America. You know, America's the greatest nation on earth for all these
Sure.
reasons. But when you look at the statistics and all the data, a lot of people around the world don't agree with that.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
I know that.
yeah.
That's not a universally accepted truth.
Well,
No.
colonialism is
Yeah.
a problem with a lot of the world, because America is considered, its imperialistic approach, like to
Mhm.
putting in puppet leaders in maybe, let's say, South American nations or Central America or parts of Europe. So there's no doubt there's a certain, you can't deny that. You can't just say, well,
Can't deny.
can't
We have-
overlook it. You have to accept that, right?
We have to realize that if the kingdoms of the earth, I come up with 2 points of acceptance. One is that if the kingdoms of the earth are the ones that are opposed to God, I shouldn't really put 100% of my faith in any of them.
That's
I
true.
should be able to view all of them with their pros and their cons and be honest and transparent, and not have any undue loyalties or patriotism to a flag.
That's true.
The second thing was, as a matter of science, that if the Lord of Heaven created the universe, then understanding how the universe works, isn't at the antithesis of my faith. It's a validation of my faith. And so I look at a lot of like quantum sciences and other areas that basically help me understand the dimensions of the universe, and how we looked at dimensions and spiritual beings, and from a religious and a allegorical metaphorical kind of way in ancient history, we're now developing sciences to help us understand some of those things a little bit more clearly. I don't think one cancels out the other. I think one complements the other. So I look at a lot of these things from saying, from a embracing the data, embracing what we can study and prove, and having a broader understanding of God and his universe and who we're supposed to be.
Wow.
So one of the things in the book that I also talk about is, and I state this as one of my defaults, is because of a number of reasons, I no longer tell people, claim myself as a Christian, although traditionally that's what you would call me. I say I'm a disciple of Yeshua. And I say Yeshua because that's the correct way to say the name. That Jesus is an Anglican bastardization of a Latin bad translation, which was a bad translation of a Greek bad translation of an Aramaic name. And I have a very simple name, and I was once called Gooey by mistake by a teacher at a new school, and I'm sensitive to people saying my name wrong. And I thought, well, if this is the Lord that I worship, then I'm going to try and learn to say his name correctly.
Yeah, well, Yeshua is certainly especially the Jewish, is the Hebraic way of saying it.
Yeah, that's the more correct way of saying the name.
I understand that Jesus Christ is the and came really from Rome, and has filtered its way through the last 2,000 years. But certainly Yeshua is his name, if you want to look. Or some say Joshua. Some say Joshua because that's another translation.
Yeah.
Right? So, but anyway, so it's good that you went through a lot of research to get to these points that where you're at. And I'm just I look forward to really reading this book. I think because it will be, okay, how did he come to this? Why did he think that? What process did he use with that? I think that's going to be fascinating for people who read it. Okay.
I'm hoping
they're not going to all agree with you. They're not going to, not everybody.
My hope is that it provokes thought.
That's right. That's what I'm writing my book for too. Yeah. I want people to say, wow, okay, I never thought of it in that way. I didn't see it that way. That's what you're doing here with this. And so,
and if I can get them to accept, at least open the possibility that we're actually living in the end times, that it's not just a feeling or not just something a pastor says that's an opinion. If I can get them to sense that there's a mathematical weight to this answer that is beyond the scope of doubt, because I'm a doubter, then the next question is, the final question is, okay, so what does this mean to our walk? What does this mean to us? And that's something I can't, and I tell in the book, that's not anything I'm qualified to answer for you. I can go through and talk about what I think it means to fill our lamps with oil, what I think it means to be the final commandment, what I think it means to be prepared, what I think he was talking about the two churches that weren't given any rebukes, instructions, how they're currently living that out. And I can say these are some of the things we need to consider, like cleansing our biases, like backing away from our idols. But those are all, what those are personal. And I can't address that other than I believe this is the time that we're called to wake up, the church to wake up. And I'm hoping that, if nothing, that it just wakes some people up to the very, very near probability of how close we are, and how it could be changed, how they should be looking at their life.
So that's really the central theme of the book is, are we living in the end times?
Yes or no?
Yeah. And not who the Antichrist may be. That
was never the point of the whole framework to begin with.
Are we living in the end times, and what does that mean to you?
Right.
I like that is true. Are we? I remember being interviewed one time. I was on a television network was interviewing me, and the guy said, "So when do you think the end time is going to come around?" And I looked right at him and said, "You're standing right in the middle of it."
Yeah.
It shocked them. This was a Christian network, but that has been the Christian view by many is, oh, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And don't worry about it. We'll be gone. And I'm like, really? Well, why is this
Total
happening?
false.
Yeah, why is this happening when that's supposed to happen at the end? And you're still standing here and I'm still standing here. And that's happening. So maybe we need to take a step back and look at this again, you know?
Well, and one of the ways that we look in the analysis, I said, well, and because there are what I call 3 levels of probabilities that I define in a model. There are things that I call basically singular. It's never happened. It's only happened once. That's a singular event in all history. Because we only have 6,000 years of proven history, we only give that a 1 in 6,000, right? Probability, which is
Right.
0.002. There are some things that are extremely rare, not like the fish, third of the fish dying in the sea, third of the birds dying. We go through several of them. There's several things that are astronomically rare, like once in 12,000 years or once in every 25 million years. Many prophecies are what I call binary. It's a flip of the coin. Well, we know that it's true. We can track all of the attributes to say this is a perfect correlation. This is happening right now. But I can't, and I use as an example one of the prophecies that talk about the rebelliousness of children and people and selfishness and everything else, and being sexually immoral. And I said, I can argue that we couldn't necessarily say that we're more or less sexually immoral than Babylon, Rome, Persia, Henry VIII, England, France, the 20th, the 1920s. We can't say that we're more or less or to what degree worse than those things. We can only validate that is now our situation.
Right.
You got to step out, Paul.
But we have to be fair about how rare some of these things are. But some of these things are so extremely rare that we have to take notice.
Right.
But again, once you calculate all of the things that have occurred only in this generation, and I'll repeat that, only in this final generation, all of the hundreds more prophecies with hundreds of attributes, with multiple attributes per prophecy, we're looking at, again, right now, the book is showing a 3.2 trillion to 1 probability that we're living in the end times. And that is beyond a statistical anomaly.
Right.
Even if I was off by a factor of 1 million, that would still be an enormously huge number.
Right. Well,
and so that's what I'm really trying to get at, is that not this prophecy or that prophecy. It's accumulation of all of these things that becomes the compelling mathematical argument. And that was why I gave that analytical way of looking at prophecy rather than from a dogma or a theological perspective, is why in my series I gave this power to an AI, so that the AI can articulate all of these correlations of what's going on in real world and help the characters move through their own self-doubts.
So what the name of the book is?
Prophecy Analytics: How to Discern Prophecy in Plain Sight with Mathematical Validation.
And it's going to be under your pen name, of course, your name, Guy.
At the end of my name.
No mispronunciation here.
I made GB Morris on this one just to I haven't quite fully decided yet. But
okay.
Yeah.
It could be GB Morris.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But so and it's coming out, guys, about the end of January-ish. We can probably find it on Amazon, I take it. Okay. Because
I'll have it on Amazon for sure.
Because I want everyone watching the podcast. And Paul, when will this podcast air?
Well, this should be next Tuesday.
Tuesday. So that's about a month ahead of the book coming out. So I want the people watching to be waiting for this book to come out and to read it and to grasp the understanding of how you came about this using analytics. This is different. This is a different approach than I've talked to rabbis.
I'm a nerdzilla. Yeah, I'm a nerd.
I've talked to rabbis who did what they call decoding the Bible. Okay. Decoding it.
Yeah.
And come up with all kinds of stuff. I'm like, okay, I see your approach. And they are saying, Paul Begley, you're in the Bible. You're in the code. You're in the code. I'm like, okay, maybe I am. But how did you come about with that system? And so it's funny because I've met people who have approach prophecy in so many different angles. This is a new one.
Yeah.
Analytics, which I'm very interested to see how that plays out. I really.
And I wanted to add to that, Pastor, though, too. I think it's from anybody decoding prophecy and end times, really, honestly, with a lot of the people that we've spoken to, a guy you're probably familiar with, Avi Loeb, right? Avi Loeb never wanted to be an astrophysicist, right? He wanted to be a philosopher, but astrophysicists and people that are involved with hard sciences and mathematics, they gravitate towards that because it's the way to actually understand our world with evidence. And I think it's really interesting that you've used that same approach for prophecies in the Bible. But my question for you with that is, and I want to, because I don't know, I don't know what you say with this, but are you, so from what I'm gathering, you're giving us mathematical validation for prophecies that have already happened, and you're not really predicting, yeah.
Exactly. And there's several places where there's actually a chapter, a couple of chapters. One is where we compare some of the prophecies about Antichrist and Messiah to Islam and what they talk about. We look at some things that haven't happened yet. So prophecies like the fall of Babylon, the third temple, and we look at some other prophecies like the two witnesses, and things that have obviously that I can say I can look at all of the attributes and I can validate that this has not yet occurred.
Right.
We should avoid trying to speculate too much. We can have a couple of ideas of practically how those things might happen, but we don't validate that they're occurred. We what we keep watch. You'll see that theme throughout the book. Keep watch.
Right.
Things are still happening. Things are still happening in ways that we don't expect. Many of the prophecies, and I point out, many of the prophecies that we validate, that we correlate, are happened in ways that nobody really expected. And so it's important for us to know, to believe that, to keep watch, to understand basically what the attributes or the outcomes are that we should be looking for.
Right.
Not to have prejudgments of how those are going to come out, because it could surprise us. And this was the problem that I point out with the Pharisees. They had a very specific way of how they believed the Messiah would come and how it would look like. And when it didn't happen to their preconceived notions, they discounted it and missed it entirely.
Right.
And so many prophetic teachers today are in the same danger zone. They have such a concrete idea of how they think it's going to happen that when it happens in a way that's not consistent with their preconceived notions, they're not seeing it now. And so one of the reasons the other reasons I want to write the book is to say, if nothing else, put aside those preconceived notions and start with a fresh view. Because sometimes those preconceived theologies and ideas of what's going to happen are keeping us from seeing the things that are happening in plain sight.
Right. I agree. I think that you can use that same philosophy and span it across pretty much every element of your life, which I think is a good thing, but it's also a very difficult thing, obviously, to not have a personal bias on certain things. Even if you recognize it, you're still like, I see it this way, but it's hard for me to be convinced because I just don't feel that way. Right.
And I admit that personal biases are the hardest thing for any of us to address. We're never going to be completely free of them. The best that we can do is be aware that we have them and at least give ourselves the willingness to have an open mind.
Right.
But to be completely free of them is impossible. We can overcome some of them. Right.
Sure.
We can re-educate ourselves on some of them, but some of them are just really deep. And some of the things that we talk about in here, like the third temple, the role of Israel, the idea that the Antichrist is a leader over the whole world. Somehow the whole world unites around this one person. Some of these things are false doctrines that won't happen, but people won't give them up.
Sure.
The rapture, right? People won't give those ideas up, even though there's very little foundation for them. So, and the other thing I at the end of the book is, at the end of the day, anybody who studies this topic has to be willing to accept the fact that as well thought out, even prophecy analytics, there's elements where I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
outcomes with a bias.
Right.
I could be interpreting the probabilities with a bias. And one of the reasons I tell people the method that I'm using is so that they can apply that method and maybe come up with a different result.
Mm.
Right. But so I'm not trying to say I figured it out and you guys haven't, nanner.
Good.
I'm trying to say I've discovered this incredibly powerfully compelling, mathematically validated approach that seems to not just pick a prophecy here and say, this is how do you interpret this or this one over here, but actually looks at the entire scope of history for the last 2,000 years up to the present day,
Mm.
and puts it into a prophetic context in a way that seems to fit mathematically.
Right. So let me ask you, guy, because I wrote this question down and I'm trying to phrase it the right way. Earlier in the conversation, I believe that I gathered this, that we were saying essentially that AI has become the voice of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct
with
inferring?
Image of the beast?
Okay, so question for you is, wait, what did you say? Image of the beast?
That it's the image of the beast that has the voice, the blasphemous voice. Yeah.
Okay, so then my question for
the image, and it's through the image of the beast. In other words, it's through this system,
yes,
this image system, from which the mark of the beast is also derived. So that also ties into that, because the banking system, the interconnected technology,
right.
is how both the image occurs and how the mark occurs. And so again, it fits those two attributes.
So, well, I mean, we had Dr. Joy Pugh on here before, and we did an episode with her. It was I forgot the title. It was AI, Neuralink, and the Beast system, which is kind of all that whole conversation. Pretty interesting, but this isn't a question of like I don't know. It's just a thought provoking question. So, do you use AI in your statistical analysis then?
No. I write about AI. I use AI for only research purposes.
Okay.
I don't ever let AI write what I write. The analysis I did, this framework was developed before AI was available publicly.
Okay.
So this is all a result of work that was done, started in the 90s.
Got it.
And so now AI, in my book, The AI Tsunami, I talk about the AI developments that went from the 50s through the 90s to where we're at today. And I was involved in different pieces of that throughout my career, but it was mainly as a product user, a designer, not a designer, but a experimental user for DARPA and a few other places.
I understand.
So I knew about the technology, the problems they had to solve, how the technology needed to evolve to get to the next phase. But I don't use, I wrote the algorithms for finding patterns for the initial program that I wrote, but it was a statistical analytical program that I wrote. It was a typical application of the late 90s. We used it for doing statistical models for finding geology. And I knew I could adapt it for the purpose I want to adapt it to. And then I realized I could simplify the probability calculations into 3 different easy to define models. And so I actually wanted to transition the model from something that needed a computer program to something I could figure out in a spreadsheet.
So how were you able to eliminate your own bias from that model, though?
Well, part of it takes time over years. You realize that if something's not correlating, it's either not correlating because the facts aren't there, or it's not correlating because I'm looking at it wrong.
Right.
And once I started realizing that some of my biases towards church and governments and economic models and other things were just part of my training, I realized, okay, let's take it from a prophetic perspective. I'm not trying. This is prophecy, and one of the conclusions that I come to in the book is that prophecy is better at this is not necessarily describing how a deity will come to destroy humanity, but it's a description of how humanity, through our vices and our greed and our hubris and our rejection of God's principles and love, would destroy itself. And so once I started realizing that we might be the cancer, I stopped looking at trying to justify this side versus that side.
Got it.
And I started looking at it as humanity versus God's plan.
Right.
Humanity versus God's ideal of what we should be. Christianity versus the teachings of Yeshua. And that one was the most difficult one, because we tend to think of the church in many ways, for some, has become an idol in itself. Where the church and the church culture, especially the church culture in America, is so revered that any factual notion that it might be corrupted by a political idol or prosperity idols or other false doctrines is almost heretical to challenge. But that's not what we're told to do. We're told in scripture that the good Christians were the Bereans, who basically took everything they heard and went to find out if it was true on their own, that questioned everything first before they decided what to believe. And so I had to, this was a, now I actually meant to say this in the book, and I say this, that this is a lot of information to digest.
Oh, yeah.
The benefit of dealing with and grappling with this within myself and my own life over 4 decades.
Right.
This is to just read this and to read that maybe the Christian church is an idol, and maybe the culture is an idol, and maybe some of these teachers are idols, and maybe some of our politics are idols, and our news sources could be idols. And to just say that in this highly polarized day and age is going to come off as an affront to some people.
Sure.
But those are conclusions I've reached after thinking about this and dealing with my own, what I watch for news and what I watch for, and adjusting my own life slowly over a period of decades.
Right.
So it's, I understand that it's going to be difficult, and I'm not trying to belittle that, and I'm not trying to, I'm certainly no better. I'm just a nerd that had an analytical approach that seems to work. And I'm never anybody that somebody would call to be a model of good faith. But I do believe that I have an analytical model that I don't think I can say this for sure. The framework itself has no inherent bias. How you use the framework could include inherent biases.
Sure. But depending on the person using it.
Telling you that my analysis is correct, I'm transparent about what my analysis is and why I came to that conclusion.
Got it.
But you have the framework to just say, well, I think he skipped over. I think this outcome is not really an outcome. I think he skipped over this other outcome. And I think how he interpreted that outcome, I could interpret that outcome against this other person that I don't like.
Right.
You can take it. But I think I've been fairly objective about how I applied it with factual information. And it might be facts that some people like or don't like, but that's not my problem to solve.
Well, and so I think it's a really, really cool, and especially for people. I mean, even for some atheists as well. I mean, the definition of atheist is probably not this. I don't know. It's probably better suited for an agnostic or scientifically minded person, right? To take this framework and put it, over pretty much you've been creating a lab and a logbook for over 40 years to put this together and trying to eliminate biases here, which is a very difficult thing to do, especially when you're speaking about prophecy for a book that's written in parables anyway, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's regardless of your outcomes or anybody that would try to, use your same outcomes and get a totally different thing, which I'm sure that they would. I think that it's a fantastic way to view the word and view prophecy.
Well, and I tell people, if you disagree with my approach, show me your outcomes, show me your analysis, do your
Right.
work, do your homework, do your own math, right?
Right.
And if you can apply all 20 attributes to another figure on the stage today, um, I almost dare you to try. Because I've tried to do that analysis, right? I've tried to look at, does this fit? And as I said, I could come up with for almost all other world leaders. Again, once you realize that, once you get down to defining what the actual beast is, it starts to narrow that field of potential leaders down to 7 world leaders at any given point in time. Does any of them ever fit since it was formed? And only one has gotten past 4 of the 20 attributes. And it's not just an opinion. These are all factually documented in journals and publications and news media and books, and you have to get to the point when you're throwing them out, you have to get to the point where I'm not going to believe that book, or I'm not going to believe that journalism. You have to throw out data you don't want to believe in order not to correlate them, and that shows a bias,
right,
when you're doing that. So I challenge people. I said, you can do that, but then that's showing your bias.
right.
And so are you allowing your bias to keep you from understanding probably one of the most important decisions you'll ever make in the last days, which is where to put your loyalties and where to avoid putting your loyalties? And if we're in the last days, then none of this really matters. This isn't about this kingdom versus that kingdom, this government style, that government style. It's about preparing our hearts for our own judgment.
Amen.
And loving others with that in context. So if we start to look at it from an analytical perspective, and we can start pushing away from those kinds of biases, we actually come to a clearer perspective of what it should mean to us.
Right.
And that's really where it gets to, because I really could care less about politics.
Sure.
Right? Kingdoms come and kingdoms go. And none of this matters at all if we're not living in the last days. But if we validate that, then all of these things matter.
Amen.
And that was the point of the book, was saying, well, let's and I really started off thinking, if I can debunk this. Now, you have to remember, I was living on a large sailboat with my son. My whole idea of retirement was being a bum someplace on my sailboat in Bora Bora. I had this whole life plan that I could live if I could just eliminate this sense of responsibility of the time that I was living in.
Right.
And if I could debunk it, I could just live my life and not have to worry about it. But if it was true, I was also, having grown up on the streets and knowing what it was like to have to make very tough life choices that could mean life or death for many. Things of what kind of life I was going to live. I knew that if I could validate this as true, that it would then have a serious and a definite impact on many of my own major life choices.
Right.
And I needed to.
I would definitely recommend to put a nice, very heartfelt introduction to this book, because people are going to view it, like you had mentioned, as far as when you're taking away your own bias about prophecy and religion and the U.S. even in politics, people are going to catch some of those things and run with them in a negative fashion, or however they want to interpret it, like they do with everybody else. So I would definitely recommend to put in a good heartfelt introduction into the book, so that people actually know what they're getting into, if you haven't done that already. But
I think I have an introduction. I have a thing where I basically call disclaimers,
Yeah.
where I basically say I realize I'm not the expert, and people are going to look at my lack of theological training and have all kinds of field days with that,
Fair.
and realize that I'm just a nerd and this is just an idea. I try to be clear up front. My goal is not to bash anybody in particular, so I don't mention any other names. I don't really try and go after any other people. I never even mention the name of the president. I just say, is there a political leader here's a political leader that has these attributes,
Got
that
it.
has so many convictions and so many lawsuits, and so I try to be I try not to even, because I'm not, again, I didn't write the book to bash anybody. I
Yeah.
did write the book to talk about a political figure. It was a journey that I was on for many years that started really coming into focus only in the last several years. And I initially started writing about it in my fiction book, so I didn't have to deal with it directly. I
Right.
could point out just certain elements and use it as part of the fiction to make my books more thought provoking. But as I've gone through my book signings for the last few years, I constantly have people coming up and ask for the book and asking questions about whether I think any of it's real. And so I think this is my way of answering that question about whether I think what I put in my fictional books is real. And the framework that I talk about in the fictional books is based on a real framework.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question before we wrap up here, Guy. Have you used the analytical system that you've developed, and have you, just for fun, maybe thrown it into AI and see what kind of results you get from it?
Oh,
Because then you're
first off,
crossing over beast systems.
first off, the framework it applies on a prophecy by prophecy basis.
Right.
So if I wanted to take any particular prophecy and say, okay, here's the piece of the prophecy that feels allegorical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here are the pieces that feel like attributes. And one of the things I say is sometimes you have to restate those attributes in a more modern context that's not tied to the color or the language of the allegory.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to kind of simplify them. But once you do that, which is a thoughtful approach, an AI might do that well. Then you're looking for facts to say, does this look like any factual events? And then that's amount of research, or sometimes it happens when I'm watching the news and I'm realizing, wait a minute, that all feels familiar. And I'll
Right.
go back and say, okay, I'll look up and say, what was the attributes for that event? And how, and it's, but could an AI do it? If you told the AI how to basically get rid of the allegory, define the outcomes,
Right.
and you gave it the historical events that could match that, technically the AI could find the patterns, come up with correlations. But right now, language model AIs are really there about language. They're not really analytical tools.
Mm-hmm.
They're working on the Q algorithms to be able to do that kind of analysis, but they're not commercial yet.
Sure, but
It's so AI is not ready yet in the current LLM form.
right. I understand, but I think that you might be better at it than I'm pretty good with it right now. I think that you can feed it enough, but then you're creating your own bias on the AI. But if you're taking this sort of approach where you're eliminating bias to it,
Yeah.
I don't know. It would be interesting to see, but I think it would be interesting because, our sort of interpretation of this conversation is AI is kind of a reflection of the beast system. So it would be interesting to see what it would give you if you
AI
fed it
is
that
going
sort of
to
model.
basically reflect what it's already been published.
Correct. But I
Yeah.
mean, but still, when you're having you start a conversation with it, like, no, I don't like you can tell, I don't like what you said. I don't like that interpretation of it. Here is, for the purpose of our conversation, the truths that you need to, go by. Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
I don't know.
And I've done that with AI relative to scientific principles around quantum theories, quantum signals.
Yeah.
Some of the other themes that I'm working on in my books. And I had asked AI some prophecy questions I'm never happy with the answers he gives me.
Yeah.
But I do ask it questions from time to time, and I think it's missing the point at times. But again, we have to remember that the current LLM models don't have a truly analytical
Right.
component. They have a language comparative idea concept component, and they can talk about things that have already been written in a sense. They're not really, like, I've gone in and basically said, compare this with compare that, make this assumption, and it's coming back and we say, oh wow, that's really radical, that's different from anything that's out there.
Yeah.
And it comes up with these sort of conceptual frameworks, and when I read through that, I say, well, it's getting this part right, it's getting this part, it's confusing this part.
Right.
And so I can do that. I hadn't done it necessarily with this book because so much of this book was developed. I basically pulled together notes that I've had for decades, some
Yeah.
cases. And it was more of my approach, my thinking of how I approached it. But yeah, I'm more than happy for people to come in and say, I stated in the book, I said, some people are going to, you know, one of the sections of the chapters is basically the stages of grief. Yeah, and one of them is anger, and anger at me for writing the book. You know, one of them is denial that I know anything that I'm talking about, and that there's going to be stages of people as they're reading this and absorbing this, and I those are all stages. I know them; they're going to go through them because I've gone through them
Right.
myself.
Right.
This is not something I wrote trying to prove anything. It's something I wrote because it's something I had to discover and wrestle with and grapple with and accept over a period of time when the math. And I said, you can disagree with the arguments, but I challenge you to actually find factual ways of disagreeing with the facts.
Right. As opposed to saying, no, that's stupid.
You
Yeah.
know, the framework, the
Right.
framework leads me to a conclusion
Right.
that I didn't reach before I applied the framework.
Right. Well, so Guy, I just want to say this has been a fascinating conversation,
Thank you so
and
much.
one that challenges us to think deeply about where technology is taking us, and more importantly, who we're becoming along the way. Your
Yeah.
work reminds us that the future isn't just something that happens to us, it's something we are participating in shaping. For those who are watching and listening, we'll have links to Guy's books and platforms on our website at paulbegleypodcast.com. Check out the link in the show notes as well. Guy, thanks for joining us today, and God bless you, sir.
Thank you, Paul. My honor.